I'm meeting today with criminal defense attorney Thomas Weber, and we're going to talk today about protecting children, because there are two different kinds of kids essentially. Those that have always been a problem to their parents, getting into trouble for whatever the reason is, and then there are other kids who, when they run into a situation where their parents are divorcing, I see this a lot, which is why I called Thomas, and that is good kids suddenly see their world crumbling around them and a lot of things happening that they don't know how to react to, and oftentimes they can get into trouble. And so what happens is kids can get into a lot of criminal trouble who may, as adults, actually straighten up and fly right, but sometimes they'll have a criminal record dogging them, in some cases, their whole lives. And so whether your children have just been problem kids for a while, or you see them heading in that direction, or suddenly because you've announced to your children that there's a divorce in the offing, they might have started to hang with the wrong crowd, they might start to act out, they might commit crimes, they might start to drink or do drugs and things like that. So Thomas, you're here today to tell people not about how to help your kids get away with anything, but how to protect your kids in the event that they find themselves faced with criminal action or actually charged. Is that right?
That's right.
All right, so before we begin, Thomas is my go-to guy for criminal defense work, whether it be for children or for adults. So for those that might need the help of a good criminal defense attorney, give them your contact information before you launch into your discussion of how to protect kids and know what your kids' rights are and the kinds of trouble that kids seem to get into, okay? All right.
My name is Thomas Weber. I'm a criminal defense practitioner. I've been practicing criminal law for about 7 years. I own my own law firm. It's Weber Law, LLC. Our website is www.law.ninja. Some people call me the Law Ninja because that's my mascot for marketing purposes. Our phone number is 801-897-1621. We also have a toll-free number, which is 877-NINJA-TALK.
If you needed something easy to remember, that's what we'll start with.
And sometimes people need that if they're in jail. So
that's right. That's an excellent idea. All right, well, take it away and tell us about some of the problems that you see minor children getting into criminally. And as I understand it, you're going to tell me about some of the big problems, some of the things parents need to be aware of, some of the things they need to tell their kids about, and things that parents and children need to know about in the event that they find themselves questioned by the police, in police custody, or actually going through criminal charges in court. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, where are we going to start with?
Well, first of all, I'd like to comment on what you said earlier about kids in a divorce. It's uncanny how often I see that problem. It almost is always in some sort of vacuum situation. Mom is less in the picture, or dad is less in the picture, so there's less structure around, or there's less.
No one to monitor, no one to keep them in what's the word I'm looking for? Just keep them in line.
Keep tabs on
even
them.
without them realizing that's what they were doing.
Yeah, and the other important factor here to recognize is that law enforcement over the last 30 years has become increasingly aggressive toward young people, and including minors. So they really are vulnerable in a lot of ways, and you know, it's because minors make mistakes, and so law enforcement is naturally gravitates where people are
low-hanging fruit.
And so you really they are at a vulnerable moment, and you have to really focus on these issues. A lot of parents think that something like this could never happen to their child, and it really does happen to some very good kids.
That's right.
And my one of the big reasons I came on to do this podcast is because so many kids will internalize this stuff. They make the mistake when they're young, and then even if we can keep it off their record, somehow it can scar them for a very, very long time. So I feel if there's proper education about the crimes and the different things that can happen in the system, you can avoid a lot of these things.
Yeah, and you can avoid a problem arising, or you can make sure you don't make a bad situation much worse,
Right.
just by your ignorance of the law.
Right.
All right. So what are we going to start with?
Well, I need to get my my outline here.
Okay.
I'm just going to grab that real quick. So, the first thing we'd like to talk about is your kids are going to be spending most of their time at school, presumably. You should know a little bit about what a school is and what it is not. A school is not the police. So the school does not have the same rules that the police have. You should understand if your child goes to school, he could be subject to any kind of search at any time. That means that essentially you should make sure that your child never ever takes any sort of contraband to school, especially knives, guns, but also drugs or pornography. I'll get a little bit to pornography in a minute.
Because schools are in loco parentis. They stand in the shoes of the parents when the kids are at school. Is that the reason why it's not like they can say, oh, I have rights and I can remain silent and things like that? Schools don't have to run through those same protections.
That's right. So the number one thing you can do is to educate your child about what is and is not acceptable at school. If you do that in advance and explain what can happen if any of these items are found on them, then you can avoid most of the problems that can come up for a juvenile. Even young kids can be educated. I would say starting at kindergarten, you can start to educate your children not to bring knives to school, certainly guns. But as they get older, you'll need to educate them about, especially with cell phones now, sexting, because sharing of explicit images can be considered a crime that's called exploitation of a minor.
Even if it's another minor exploiting himself or herself or a friend.
Yes.
Is that right? It's not just adults that commit this crime.
Yes. So sexual exploitation of a minor is the child porn crime, and it can carry a really very, very deep stigma with it. So if you are going to have your child have a cell phone, there needs to be an intense amount of education that goes along with that cell phone. The police have restrictions on when they can search someone's personal items in school. However, school administrators don't have those same restrictions, as we've already discussed. So you should also educate your children that even though they may have a locker at school, that doesn't constitute a private space for them. That's private. That locker is still part of the entire school grounds that can be searched at will, essentially at will.
Either by school officials or by the police with the permission of the school officials. Is that right?
That's right.
So if somebody says, no, I will not open my locker, the principal can say, okay, that's fine, I'll just take my master key, or we'll just cut the lock off and we'll look at ourselves.
That's right.
Okay. Again, something that a lot of people did not know. And once you know that, then it's like, don't put contraband in your locker. Don't put something in there and think that it's safe, because it can be searched at any time.
Yes, and my experience with talking with kids and educating them about, I'm not trying to help your kids get away with something. My experience is that once you educate them about the law, they're less likely to commit the crime in the first place. It's
not a bag of tricks you're sharing here, but let's face it. Again, you stated it best at the beginning. There are some good kids who will make boneheaded mistakes, who even upon realizing what they've done will say, that just isn't like me. Why would I do something like that? I remember it's not that long ago that I was a teenager myself. And what's so sad, like you pointed out, is that we're not as forgiving as a society as we used to be. And you can end up having a crime committed in your youth that prevents you from getting government jobs or getting into the military or getting a law license. There's all sorts of things. And so you got to be a lot, just like we're educating kids about the birds and the bees and sex education much younger than we used to. It's time to tell kids about their innocence just isn't what it was a generation ago, right?
Right. Exactly.
All right.
I'd like to talk about police questioning. There may be a time when your child is questioned by the police. It could be for something they've done. It could be for something that someone else has done. You should educate your children, and I do educate my children, even at a very young age. My kids are still very young, but I educate them about what they do have to say to the police and what they are not required to say to the police. even minors have Fifth Amendment rights and Fourth Amendment rights. The Fifth Amendment says that you don't have to say anything against yourself. The Fourth Amendment says that you can't be searched unreasonably. Now, we've already covered essentially the Fourth Amendment, which there are limited Fourth Amendment rights when you're on school grounds. But let's talk about the Fifth Amendment. There's a special rule under Utah law. It's the Utah Rule of Juvenile Procedure 27A. It talks about admission of statements by minors. If your child is over 14, then the presumption is that anything that the police get from an interview can be admitted into court. So at about 14 years old, you should start educating your children that they don't have to talk to the police. One. And two, if the police want to talk to them, then they should ask for an adult to be present. Well, a parent to be present, really. If they do this, then they can avoid a lot of very big problems. 14 is another threshold age because there are various degrees of consent for sex and for other types of crimes that once you hit 14, you become more liable and more culpable for some of those crimes. So that's a very key age to really focus in and make sure your children are educated. The reason I say that no child should be talking to a police officer without a parent present is because kids say dumb stuff. So they can say anything that a police officer wants them to say and not really realize what it's doing to their own life, or not really realize whether or not it's the truth.
Mm-hmm. And I've heard things about, well, if I say yes and that's the answer you need, then I can go back to recess, or
right.
and so they don't understand that the police will be using it for a purpose far different from what this child may see
right.
the purpose in answering. There's a lot. Hey, let me ask you something really quick because I didn't know this. So you're saying under the age of 14, what was that you said, that anything a child says can be admissible?
Over the age of 14, if a child consents to speak with a police officer,
that's
he will
admissible.
It is admissible even though a parent is not present.
But under the age of 14?
Under the age of 14, a parent must be present in order for something the child says
Okay.
to be admissible.
So that's kind of like it's kind of like Kitty Miranda rights, in other words.
Kitty Miranda rights.
All right, so in other words, if you question a child under the age of 14 without a parent present, or without the consent of the parent saying, you may question my child without me present, then it's not admissible.
It's not admissible.
Oh,
That's
interesting.
Right.
Okay.
So I personally think you should educate your children as young as 7 and 8 and 9. I know that sounds ridiculous, but you don't. It doesn't have to be a
scared straight situation.
No, it doesn't have to be a scared straight situation. It can be something very simple like, we live in America. I want you to know that in America, nobody can take away something that you have without your permission, even the police.
Mm-hmm.
And the police are good guys, but sometimes they make mistakes. So if a police officer, or anyone for that matter, ever wants to talk to you about something that you may have done wrong, you can always come to me. In fact, you should. The first thing you should ever do if you're ever accused of breaking a serious rule is come to mommy or daddy and make sure that mommy or daddy is there if the police want to talk to you, or anyone wants to talk to you.
Yeah, because I mean, and I'll be a little less kind. I mean, there are a lot of police officers, not all, but enough, more than enough, that are not necessarily interested in finding out what's really happening. It's just, can I get a confession? Can I get some useful dirt on somebody? And I don't particularly care if they're telling the truth or not. Now, in fairness, police are accustomed to getting lied to by criminals all the time, but they get very cynical, and they're not going to cut you a lot of slack. They don't know you're innocent. They're going to presume that you've got something to hide, and they'll be trying to get you to slip up, even if you are not guilty of something, and they can twist words. So
Yes.
your right to remain silent is not your right to be uncooperative.
Right.
It's for your protection.
Right. And I teach my kids to be respectful to the officer. you don't need to throw it in their face. Most officers I know have a great amount of respect for people, and especially children, who elect to remain silent. They may, on the outside, an officer may say, well, okay, you want a lawyer or you want your parent to be present, well, you must be guilty. But secretly, inside, most officers that I know of are, on the inside, are secretly saying, well, geez, you know what, I actually really respect what you're doing right now. I respect the Fifth Amendment. That's why I became a police officer. That's what I'm trying to do.
I enforce the law.
That's what I value the law above all else, including the Fifth Amendment. And so internally, they'll really respect your child. So it's important to educate your children about that. 14 is a very, very important age. 18 is also a very, very important age. I know that we're talking about juvenile.
Right, and so when you stop being a juvenile is age 18.
Age 18, but right after 18, law enforcement really targets a lot of people right at the age of 18. And technically, for alcohol in Utah, you're still considered a minor, even until you're 21. So those are really the two times to really educate your children and really get involved and help them to understand not only what they should and shouldn't do, but also the legal strategies for defending against accusations, whether they be true or false. A lot of them are true. Let's face it, our kids make mistakes. Yeah. 14 is a really hard time. It's an age of consent for sex. So sometimes what often happens is I'll have a 16-year-old or a 15-year-old young boy who has sex with a 13-year-old girl, and so that many times will be considered rape. And so it's important to educate your kids about sex.
And Thomas is going to also talk about some of the distinctions, because 14 is the age of consent for sex, depending upon the age of the person you're having sex with. But it's not every 14-year-old cannot have sex with anybody. Isn't that correct?
That's right.
So what is the distinction there? So you talked about 15-year-old boys having sex with 13-year-old girls because they're under the age of 14. But when can a 14-year-old still be a victim of a crime, even if that 14-year-old wants to engage in the sexual act? It's still considered rape in what circumstances?
Well, there's thresholds at 16, 17, and 18.
Okay.
So 14, 16, 17, and 18. And then once you're over 18, then there's a it's kind of like a rolling gap that is acceptable. Once you're over 10 years greater than the age of the minor that you had sex with, then the crime elevates.
Okay,
so it's a spectrum.
So
it's a spectrum to make it
14-year-old
simple, and I don't remember all of the details, but if they're not the same year, age, there's potentially trouble.
Yeah, because if you're older than the 14-year-old, just because that's the thing I wanted to point out.
However, there is a doctrine. There is
Sure.
a doctrine that's called the absurd results doctrine, which says that, well, if they're both under 14, and you can't accuse the boy of rape merely because he's the boy and the girl's the girl, if it was otherwise consensual. So,
Interesting.
And that applies going up as well. So 15 and 16-year-olds, if they're having sex with each other, then they can't necessarily get in trouble. That doesn't mean that your kid is okay to talk about it. Your Fifth Amendment right to remain silent, your child's Fifth Amendment right to remain silent, should be strongly emphasized and really sacrosanct for so many reasons. Sorry, are you going to say something?
No. So what else do we want to talk about then? We've talked about some of these age differences, 14, consent, right to remain silent, some of the other things that you can get in trouble with. What other kinds of concerns do you have? What do you see? Okay, marijuana?
Marijuana.
Number one, is it legal in Utah to smoke
Utah.
recreationally?
No, it's not. So it's not even legal for medical use right now, which is really... Most prosecuting attorneys I know are in favor of medical marijuana. It just is, our legislature has some problems there. But here's the thing with marijuana, okay? How can you tell your kids to not do marijuana? Okay, you don't want them to do marijuana, but at the same time, educate them. If they're doing marijuana,
then here's how
then
not to
here's
get
how
caught.
they do it, not,
Because
and not get caught.
Because you're afraid that you might be implicitly saying, go ahead and do it, and I've shown you how to get away with it.
No, right.
All right. That's not what we're here to do. What we're here to talk about is if you've got a child who's smoking marijuana and you know about it and you're not sure you can talk sense into them, here's what you tell them.
You tell them to do it at home. You tell them to
Okay.
do it at home, and you tell them to definitely don't take it to school. Never take it to school, and you never take it in a car.
Okay.
That's it. And at home, you know.
By the way, you can't.
They can't do it at home either, because if you
can't
do,
be, well, wait, you can't be arrested for smoking marijuana at home, right?
you can.
Oh, yeah. See, so what Thomas is
Right.
saying is that it's if you're going to break the law, it's the odds are better that you won't get caught if you smoke
Well,
marijuana at
and-
home. But
and-
that doesn't mean it's legal.
Yeah, well, and you can't even do that as a parent. You can't even do that because the moment you're doing that, then you're encouraging your child to do marijuana. So
Right.
it's a very tight line to draw. But if you understand what's going on, you understand that in your home you have more protections from unlawful search. That's the point that I'm trying to get across. In your home, you have more protections from unlawful search. So to the extent that you can control marijuana use, keep it out of the car and keep it out of the school. Okay? You know the kid's doing it. Okay? You don't know where the marijuana is in the house. He's got it hidden somewhere under his mattress or something. Tell him, teach him that taking it to school, he's going to get caught. He's going to get caught. So,
Yeah. Because the things they see on TV about I've got rights, I've got privacy, you can't search without my consent.
It's not true.
Doesn't apply in school, and some
Doesn't
kids
apply.
don't know that.
I'll talk about process. So in Utah, there's for minor crimes, there's an intake process where you can go through a non-judicial program, and your kid doesn't have to necessarily go in front of a judge. In those circumstances, it is usually a good idea to get a lawyer, but not always totally necessary. If you're ever in front of a judge, it's almost universally a good idea to get a lawyer.
And this is for any crime, not just a marijuana crime.
Not just for marijuana.
This is for
crimes.
any juvenile charged with a crime.
In juvenile court, you don't have a right to a jury, which means that the judge will decide whether or not you're guilty. So determination of whether or not you should fight the case should be, you really should consult with a lawyer about whether or not to fight the case.
Is that because the judge will lean toward conviction? Is that what you're
Judges
saying?
generally, in criminal cases, my experience has been that judges tend to lead toward conviction where there's a dispute between an authority figure like a police officer and a civilian.
And that's why you're saying get an attorney when you're before a judge, because that small difference could be the difference between conviction and acquittal.
Yes.
And so it's because folks, if you think that juvenile court judges are big-hearted people who just want to help troubled youth, that could be true.
Could be.
But it's not a job qualification, and it's not the judges in the juvenile courts are not charged with cut kids slack, give them a break. That can happen. But if you think that you don't need a lawyer because it's just juvenile court and it's no big deal.
That's
No,
not
it's
the-
not. But just like you said, the police and law enforcement are getting more aggressive, going after children and young people, and the courts are getting, as a result, full of cases where these judges are saying, I'm going to go by the book. Sometimes they might show some mercy, but even then, in some cases, judges are limited by how much leniency they can show. If certain facts are proven, then there are certain things the judge has to do. Is that right?
That's right. I also am very careful to I sometimes have parents who want to get their child in trouble, in order to scare the child into being straight.
Hmm.
I generally argue against that. I think it almost universally turns out to be a bad idea. Juvenile courts don't just punish your child. They also can have, when they don't do a verdict. They do something that's called an adjudication. When they do an adjudication, sometimes they can take, based on their jurisdiction, they can take custody of the child. They can
Away from the parents.
Away from the parent, which is against the parent's will sometimes.
So
And-
you're talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, you're talking about a kid who is smoking pot, for example, and the parents say, you know what, we're going to put an end to this right now. We're calling the cops.
We're calling the cops.
And we're going to scare this kid into straightening up.
Yeah.
But the police officer, who isn't your buddy or isn't a friend, comes over and says, oh, well, thank you for ratting out your child. Now we're going to arrest this child.
Right.
And then the juvenile court judge learns a little more about your family. Might say, well, not only do I have concerns about just the marijuana, but you seem to be very lax parents, bad parents, or you have other family members that are dangerous. I've also discovered other crimes that this marijuana smoking child of yours has also committed. I'm taking the child away. I'm putting the child in juvenile detention. So that things can snowball and unravel for the best intentioned parents.
Right. It's counterintuitive. It is. And talk to a lawyer. I know that sounds
Self-serving?
cliche and trite. The other thing I do is, and I'm not trying to plug myself here, but what I do is I have all my clients, but especially my young clients, I have my little mini business cards, and I say, well, you just keep that in your wallet. When the police come, you don't have to know how to really talk to the police or confront them, which is a hard thing for any kid to really stand up to that authority. You can have that. But
So that way they've got your number
they've got my number and
and they can call.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so I keep them very small. The reason I'm showing it to you is because it's small.
Yeah.
It can fit in your wallet and
Fit almost anywhere.
yeah. The way to handle it is you just say the police officer comes up to you and you say, "Hi, officer. I appreciate what you're doing here today, and I appreciate you. However, I would like to exercise my right to remain silent. I have a family lawyer who helps my family in cases like this. Here's his business card." At that point, the officer should consider himself precluded from answering further questions.
Or asking further questions.
Asking
yeah.
further questions, yeah. Demanding answers to further questions.
Yeah.
So,
And even though and what Thomas is saying there is some officers will disregard those rights, but if you're in police custody and there's a recording being made and things like that, there's more. You're making a record of that. That protection will be. You're giving yourself every opportunity to state for the record you're invoking those rights.
well, if you have something physical, if you've given them this card, it's going to be a lot riskier for an officer to say, "Well, no, he didn't tell me he had a lawyer."
Yeah, he didn't tell me he had a lawyer. He just showed me this card. Yeah,
Yeah.
people are gonna
And
not
so,
buy that.
I'm of the opinion that it's a good idea, especially if you have kids who are you can sense are gonna engage in risky behavior. I'm of the opinion that it's a good idea to have a criminal attorney just on call. It's not expensive. I'm not trying to plug myself here. I'm
Right.
trying to
be
I'm
any
trying-
good criminal
any good
defense
criminal
attorney.
defense attorney and any competent criminal defense attorney, frankly. Just when your kids understand, they can avoid so much heartache and
Or getting railroaded by
because kids don't understand.
overzealous police.
Yeah, and they don't understand. They just know I am in so much trouble. I must be the worst person on the planet. I must be the worst person on the planet because I've got 10 police officers here, and
I
they're all
wonder-
because they're all concerned about the kid, but they don't understand what they're doing to the psyche of this young person.
Well, and then sometimes they learn at that age. They're thinking, if I really confess to everything and more,
Then everything will be okay.
then they might say, "Oh, well, we appreciate you being such a stand-up guy. Now, don't do that again." And then what happened? But you know what? Everything you say can and will be used against you.
That's
That's not
right.
just idle chatter. So a lot of kids think, well, how many times have we taken the fall for something when it wasn't really our fault, but it was just to move things along?
Right.
Doesn't work in the criminal world.
Right. And your kids are subject to potential criminal penalties. In Utah, most juvenile convictions can be sealed or expunged, but don't count on it. Don't count on it. I've had many instances where prosecutors have been able to get back in and open those up. And it's worth getting a lawyer if you're anything. Well, before earlier I said if you're potentially just doing a non-judicial intake process, then sometimes you don't need a lawyer. I better take that back, and I better just say, just consult. Just go talk with somebody. See.
Yeah, you may determine that by talking to the lawyer you don't need one,
Right.
but at least you've given yourself the benefit of finding out what your options are.
Right. Sometimes you need two lawyers. Sometimes you need a good family practitioner, and then sometimes you need to get the criminal lawyer.
And I'll be the
involved.
first to tell you that I don't know a lot of criminal defense law anymore. I mean, there were some times earlier in my career when I did some criminal defense, and back after you've taken the bar, that's the most law you're ever going to know for most people for the rest of their careers.
Right.
So nobody likes to spend money on attorneys generally, but it is worthwhile to get a criminal defense attorney. As you said, a competent criminal defense attorney is going to know a whole lot more than a good family law attorney. Good family law attorneys may know a few things here and there related to domestic violence and some stuff like that, but if you say my child is getting in trouble with marijuana or shoplifting or things like that, don't come to me. I can look it up and I can charge you the money to have to do that, or you can go to somebody like Thomas who already knows the answers.
One other thing I want to talk about, parties. Parties. Sometimes there's underage drinking and drugs at parties.
Drugs, loud music, ordinances being violated, stuff like that.
Well, what happens is they're all partying, and then the cops get called in on the loud music, and then the cops are at that point they suspect a crime of disorderly conduct,
Okay.
which is the loud music. But when they come in, they say, "Oh, geez, how could we possibly have anticipated there's underage drinking going on too?" It's like, and so it just is it's an open door. It's an invitation for the police to catch you. Educate your children. It is. I know that this is something you want your children to stay away. You want them to stay away from these parties, right? But why not tell them the legal ramifications? Why not tell them that you're just opening the door for the police to walk in. They'll breathalyze everybody in the house, and if there's drugs on the table, they might just charge your kid with the drugs on the table, even if it's not necessarily your kids.
That's interesting.
And it's happened many times. It's happened many times in my history as a criminal defense lawyer. And I know I sound like such a prude and I sound like such an old guy.
Well, not only that, I mean, I remember as a teenager going to some parties where I didn't know there was going to be any kind of illegal activity. I wasn't looking for it.
Yeah.
But I got invited, and I showed up like,
Well,
oh my gosh, this is what's happening.
You need to educate them. If you go there and you see something that's there, you leave.
Yeah.
Not only for moral reasons, not only because you want to grow up to be a wholesome child, but for legal reasons. Because you are astute, you're an astute child. You understand how to protect yourself.
Right. You have a
from-
future that you want to protect. You're not.
You want to protect him.
And again, I mean, not to sound nerdy, it's not that you're telling the kids that you don't want to be popular or things like that. What you're saying is, look, your popularity doesn't have to come at the cost of putting yourself at risk legally. Again,
Legally, yeah.
As a parent myself, I might say I don't want my children going to a party where there's underage drinking and drugs because I don't want my children to start to consume alcohol and drugs and get out of control. But even if that didn't matter to me, I don't want my child who might be on track to get a scholarship or something like that to get arrested and innocently convicted of having those drugs, even though they weren't his or hers, but the police decided to finger them for it.
Let me tell you one other thing, and that is this. I don't know how it happens. Just like I was saying earlier, it's uncanny how kids who are going through a divorce get in trouble. But there's something else that is uncanny, which is this. Once kids get in trouble once, it's so easy for them to get in trouble again. And I don't know how it happens. I mean, I had this one client who, and I think I can talk about this case, but this one client who got in trouble for underage drinking, okay? And he decided, he's like, I'm smart enough. I got in trouble, I got convicted once, but I'm smart enough, I can keep drinking and not get in trouble. He goes out to the West Desert, which is in the middle of nowhere.
The literal middle of nowhere.
It's the middle of the nowhere. The police were out there from a mile away with night vision goggles.
Oh my God.
I just am trying to tell, they will get caught. The police will jump out of the bushes and catch them because they're not, these are not criminal masterminds that we're talking about here. And they just want to have fun. But, if you can keep them out of trouble once, or if they get in trouble once, if you can, which is another reason to get them in front of an attorney, frankly. You get them in front of an attorney, that attorney will educate them about how to protect themselves. But after that first time, if you can come down and you can just really explain to them what this means for their future, explain what it means for their legal standing in our society.
It's protection, not just to tell them how to stay out of trouble, but also letting them know, here are the consequences if you get caught. Here are the consequences if you get caught again.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I would say that's a huge thing. If you can have a really, really strong intervention after the first encounter with law enforcement, then I think that most kids are going to be okay. Most kids, and I've seen some kids who've done some really stupid stuff, but at heart, most kids can be rehabilitated very quickly. Most kids are not deep down inside bad people. And, that comes later in life when we I don't know.
A couple of questions.
Spend time being adults and learning to be bad people as adults.
As we wrap up, a couple of questions. What about parents saying, "All right, thank you for telling me what happened with regard to this shoplifting or these drugs or alcohol or even the sexual activity as a minor. I'll handle it with the police." And that way, you don't have to worry about anything you say being held against you. I'll just tell them myself, because that way if they decide
Go talk to a lawyer. Talk to a lawyer, really. I mean,
what the parents tell the police can still be used against the children. Doesn't mean it always will, but it can, right?
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah. And so I know parents, you're thinking of trying to avoid the expense, avoid the stigma, the embarrassment in the community and things like that. My experience, and I can't speak for Thomas, I'll ask him separately. When you try to handle your legal matters yourself, you usually waste precious time and often dig yourself a deeper hole without you even realizing it until it's too late. And then whatever money you saved on that attorney is spent tenfold on the fines, and the embarrassment gets even worse because then it becomes public knowledge, or you might have the ankle monitor or something like that, or your children.
Mm. It's like me trying to fix my car, Eric, and I don't try to fix my car anymore. I just know that I'm going to make myself probably injure myself.
Thomas, if parents would like to schedule an hour or so to sit down with you or sit down with a child who's either in trouble or headed down the wrong road or not in trouble, what would you charge someone to meet with the parents or the child who's not yet charged with a crime? What would that cost?
I do. I have an initial consultation fee of $0, which means I don't charge anything for a free consultation. I have clients who are.
I'm talking about non-clients. I'm talking about the parents that say, "I just want my children to know."
Nothing.
Okay.
There.
Really?
Nothing. Yeah, that's right. And, if they're under investigation, and I'm going to be handling some delicate matters with the investigation, I may charge for that, but if it's an initial consultation, it's free.
That's generous. That's wonderful. Well, thank you very much for coming to talk to us today. And for those that would like to get in touch or that need the help of a criminal defense attorney to keep their kids out of trouble or to help get their kids out of the trouble they may find themselves in, would you give your contact information one more time?
Sure. My name's Thomas Weber. My phone number is 801-897-1621. Or you can call. You can get me online. My website is www.law.ninja. Or you can call my 877 number, 877-NINJA-TALK.
Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks
Thanks
very
for the
much.
good advice.
Yeah, you too.